My name is Alara Hayes. For most of my 42 years, I've lived here in Oak Haven, a city nestled in a valley where the Willamette River bends slow and wide, its surface reflecting the moody Oregon sky. My father was a cabinet maker, a man who spoke more with his hands than his mouth. He taught me the quiet dignity of building things that last. He'd run his palm over a freshly sanded piece of maple and say, "Good work has its own voice, Ellie. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." He also taught me about boundaries, though he never used the word. One afternoon, I was trying to force a slightly warped piece of oak into a frame. I was getting frustrated, ready to hammer it into submission. He put a hand on my arm, his touch gentle but firm. "Sometimes," he said, looking at the wood, "not me, you just have to let a crooked board be crooked. You can't spend your whole life trying to plane something straight that doesn't want to be. You just build around it. Or you choose not to use it at all." I carried that lesson with me, though for a long time, I only applied it to wood. With people, I was a planer. I'd smooth over their rough edges, accommodate their warped perspectives, and sand down my own needs to make everything fit. It's a habit you learn when you grow up the quiet one, the observer, the one who keeps the peace. For 12 years, I'd been the quiet one at Riverbend Solutions, a mid-sized tech logistics firm that was, for the most part, a decent place to work. My domain was the payroll system. But it wasn't just a system to me. When I was hired, the company was using a patchwork of outdated software that was prone to crashing. Paychecks were often late, or worse, incorrect. I remember the anxiety in the voices of people calling HR, the single mothers and recent graduates for whom a 2-day delay was a catastrophe. So, I built them something better. I called it the archive. It wasn't just code, it was a structure, a sanctuary for the financial heartbeat of nearly 2,000 employees. I designed it from the ground up, weaving together security protocols, automated compliance checks, and redundancies with the same care my father used to join two pieces of wood. It was my craft. It was stable, reliable, and invisible when it was working perfectly, which it always was. The archive's core, its soul, was a single, heavily encrypted file I called the integrity seed. It was the cryptographic key that authenticated every single transaction. Without it, the archive was just a silent, locked box. By federal regulation and my own stringent design, the seed existed in only one place on a secure local server. No cloud backup, no shadow copy. That was its strength. That was its vulnerability. It was a responsibility I took so seriously it felt like a physical weight in my chest. For 11.5 years, that weight was a comfortable one. It was the satisfying burden of purpose. Then, 6 months ago, Julian Vance arrived. He was brought in as the new director of internal systems, my new boss. He walked into our quiet, functional department like a cold front, all sharp angles and the faint, cloying scent of an expensive cologne that seemed to be trying too hard. He was from a startup in California that had burned bright and fast, and he spoke in a language of disruption, synergy, and scalable paradigms. He used these words like talismans, meant to ward off the suspicion that he didn't actually understand what any of us did. He never once asked me about the history of the archive. He never sat down to understand its architecture. Instead, he'd glance at my reports, his eyes skating over the details, and say things like, "We need to streamline this. Get it on the cloud. Make it more agile." He saw my meticulous documentation not as a strength, but as a sign of an old-fashioned, territorial mindset. In a team meeting, he presented my quarterly maintenance and security audit as his own proactive optimization initiative. He didn't just steal the credit, he rebranded it in his own empty language, and I sat there, watching him, feeling that old instinct to plane things smooth. I said nothing. I just let the warped board sit there in front of everyone. But it was a heavy silence. The friction grew. He'd schedule team-building workshops during critical system update windows I'd flagged weeks in advance. He'd dismiss my concerns about a new third-party vendor's data security with a wave of his hand. They're industry leaders, Alara. They know what they're doing. He saw my caution as resistance to his grand, modern vision. He couldn't see the craftsmanship. He only saw clutter he hadn't created himself. I found myself thinking of my father more and more. Of the quiet satisfaction in his workshop. Of the dignity of doing a job right for its own sake. I started taking longer walks along the river after work, watching the water flow steadily downstream, indifferent to the noise and posturing of the world. I was trying to find my own quiet center again, the one Julian's presence was steadily eroding. I was tired of planning. I was just so tired. I knew the day was going to be bad the second I saw him leaning back in his chair, twirling a silver pen between his fingers like a prop. The morning light, usually soft and hopeful as it filtered through the Douglas firs outside, was sliced into harsh stripes by the blinds in his office. That half-smile he wore, the one that never reached his eyes, was firmly in place. He didn't offer me a seat. He just gestured with his chin toward the empty space in front of his polished, minimalist desk. "Elara," he began, his tone oozing a kind of practiced, patient condescension. "We've talked about decluttering our legacy systems. It's time to move forward. I need you to sunset that old payroll drive. It's just archival data at this point, and it's a bottleneck." I felt a familiar tightening in my stomach, the physical manifestation of being misunderstood. He wasn't talking about just any drive. He was talking about the secure local server. He was talking about the home of the integrity seed. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice even and calm. "That's not archival data. That server holds the active encryption key for the entire payroll system. The archive can't function without it." He gave a small, dismissive scoff. "That's what I mean by bottleneck. We're moving to a team-owned infrastructure. We can't have one person or one file holding the keys to the kingdom. It's not a secure or collaborative model." There it was. The accusation, wrapped in slick corporate jargon. I was the problem. My work, the stable, silent engine that had run flawlessly for over a decade, was being painted as a liability. The heat rose in my neck, but I thought of the river, of its slow, inexorable movement. I held his gaze. "The security model was designed to comply with federal financial regulations, Julian. The isolation of the key is a feature, not a bug. There is no backup. Deleting it would be," I searched for a word he might understand, "catastrophic." "Elara, don't be dramatic," he said, his smile tightening. "It's just an old file. We're migrating to newer, better systems. You need to let go of these old protocols. It's just cleanup. Housekeeping." I stood there, silent for a long moment, the hum of the building's ventilation system filling the space between us. I looked at his face, at the confident ignorance shining in his eyes. He didn't just not understand, he was proud of not understanding. He saw my careful work as an insult to his authority. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, quiet clarity. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "Sometimes, you just have to let a crooked board be crooked." I had tried to explain. I had tried to educate. I had tried to protect the system, and him, from his own recklessness. I had spent 6 months planing, sanding, and trying to force this warped piece of wood into a frame where it simply did not fit. And now, I was done. I took a slow breath. "Just to be absolutely clear," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You're instructing me to delete the integrity seed file from the secure server?" He was already looking down at his laptop, dismissing me. Yes, that's what I said. Clean it up. Erase the files. Let's get it done today." He waved a hand in my direction, a gesture of finality. He couldn't know, that in that single, careless wave, he had just set his own future on a course he couldn't possibly imagine. He thought he was asserting his power. In reality, he was handing me the quiet dignity of my own. I didn't argue further. I didn't try to warn him again. I simply nodded. "All right, Julian." I turned and walked out of his office. The walk back to my desk felt different. The air seemed clearer, the sounds of the office more distinct. Each footstep was deliberate, not heavy with dread, but grounded in a new, unsettling peace. I was no longer responsible for his ignorance. I was only responsible for following a direct, unequivocal order. I sat down in my chair, the worn fabric a familiar comfort. I opened the secure administrative console for the archive. The interface was simple, text-based, a world away from the flashy graphics Julian admired. It was a place of function, not form. I navigated to the directory. There it was, integrity_seed. A small file, no more than a few kilobytes, holding the cryptographic weight of 2,000 people's livelihoods. My finger hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't an act of malice. It felt more like a surrender. A release. I was letting the crooked board be what it was. The consequences were its own. I typed the command for deletion. The system, as I had designed it, asked for a final confirmation. It was a safeguard against a stray keystroke, a moment to pause and reflect. Are you sure you wish to permanently delete this file? Y/N. I paused. I thought of the late-night calls I'd taken years ago, the frantic work to fix the old, broken system. I thought of the quiet pride I felt every other Friday when 2,000 paychecks went out without a single error. I thought of my father, his calloused hands, and his simple wisdom. This wasn't destroying my work. It was honoring the part of it that demanded accountability. I typed Y and pressed enter. The file was gone. A quiet blink of the cursor on an empty line was the only acknowledgement. No fanfare, no warning sirens. The most profound acts of destruction are often silent. Then I did the last thing my role required. I opened the system's audit log, a permanent, unalterable record of all administrative actions. I typed a single, clean line. 10:17 a.m. File integrity_seed.dat deleted from secure server per directive from Director Julian Vance. No emotion. No embellishment. Just the fact. The kind of fact that would later be read in a room full of very serious people. From across the office, I could hear Julian laughing with another manager, his voice loud and confident. He was probably recounting his version of our conversation about how he was finally clearing out the deadwood. I leaned back in my chair and closed my laptop. The hum of the office settled over me, a familiar sound that now felt entirely separate from me. The first domino had been tipped. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a vast, echoing quiet inside me. It was the sound of a boundary finally, irrevocably, being drawn. Instead of going to the cafeteria for lunch, I left the building. I needed air that wasn't recycled, a view that wasn't a cubicle wall. I walked the 2 blocks to the riverfront park, the familiar path a balm to my frayed nerves. The sky was overcast, a soft, gray blanket that muted the colors of the city. The river moved slowly, a deep, knowing presence. I sat on a bench, watching a heron stand impossibly still in the shallows, its focus absolute. It wasn't waiting in anger or anticipation, just in perfect, patient alignment with its purpose. For the first time in 6 months, I felt a similar alignment within myself. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion since Julian's arrival had receded. In its place was a heavy calm. I hadn't acted out of spite. It was a conclusion, not a retaliation. It was the final, logical step in a long series of moments where my expertise was dismissed and my work devalued. I had held up the roof for him, quietly patching the holes his arrogance tore in our procedures. Today, I had simply stepped aside and let him feel the weight of the structure he was in charge of. A part of me felt a pang of sadness. Not for Julian, but for the beautiful, intricate thing I had built. The archive was more than a system. It was a promise I had made to every employee at Riverbend. A promise of stability. A promise that their hard work would be honored, on time, every time. Now, that promise was broken. But I knew I could fix it. The knowledge of how to regenerate the integrity seed was mine alone. It was a complex, multi-day process involving cryptographic protocols and manual authentications that only I was authorized to perform. The company had agreed to these terms in my contract years ago, a safeguard put in place after a previous data breach. The clause was buried in legalese, a testament to the foresight of a previous, wiser leadership. I could rebuild it. But the question that sat with me, as I watched the heron finally spear a fish from the water was not if I could, but on what terms I would. This wasn't about holding the company hostage. It was about reclaiming the respect that had been chipped away day by day. It was for every time Julian had called my careful documentation paranoid, every time he'd presented my work as his own, every time he'd made me feel like an obstacle to be managed instead of a craftsman to be valued. I stayed by the river for over an hour, letting the cool breeze wash over me. I wasn't plotting my next move. I was simply being still, letting the consequences of the morning settle. I had let the crooked board be crooked. Now, I just had to wait and see how the rest of the frame would hold up around it. When I walked back into the office, the atmosphere was unchanged. Keyboards clicked, phones rang, a low hum of productivity filled the air. Julian was in a meeting, his voice a low drone from behind the glass wall of a conference room. No one knew the heart of our financial system had stopped beating. The body was still moving, but the signal that gave it life was gone. The first sign would come tomorrow morning, when the automated payroll batch was scheduled to run at 5 a.m. It would fail. And then, the quiet would break. I spent the rest of the afternoon archiving my own personal project files and clearing out my desk, a slow, methodical process. It wasn't an act of defiance, but of acceptance. Whatever happened next, my time at Riverbend Solutions, as I had known it, was over. I was either on my way out or on my way to something entirely new. Either way, I would not go back to being the silent planer of another man's warped ego. The next morning, I came to work at my usual time. The office was still quiet, steeped in the bluish pre-dawn light. I made a cup of tea, the ritual a small anchor in a day I knew would be a storm. I didn't have to check the system logs. I knew what I would find. At 5:01 a.m., an automated high-priority alert would have been sent to the finance department and the director of internal systems. The payroll batch had failed. Authentication error. At 8:15 a.m., my phone rang. It was David Chin from finance, a kind, meticulous man I'd worked with for years. Alara? Morning. I've got a strange flag here. The payroll batch failed. It's citing a core authentication failure. I've never seen that before. Is there a server issue? I'm not sure, David, I said, my voice neutral. Julian is the director now. All system alerts are routed to him. You should probably check with him. Oh. Right, David said, a note of confusion in his voice. I tried him. He said he'd look into it. Said it was probably a network glitch. A network glitch. The denial was as predictable as it was foolish. I thanked David and hung up. The first pebble had been tossed into the pond. By 9:30 a.m., the ripples were spreading. I saw David walking briskly toward the office of our CFO, Mr. Alistair Croft. Croft was a man from another era, quiet, sharp, and someone who, like my father, respected craftsmanship above all else. He had been with Riverbend for 30 years and understood its inner workings intimately. A few minutes later, Julian strolled out of his office, a coffee mug in his hand. He caught my eye and gave me a curt nod, a flicker of something annoyance? Suspicion, in his gaze before he turned away. He still didn't get it. He thought it was a simple technical problem, something his IT team could reboot. The IT team, two bright young technicians named Marco and Lena, were soon huddled around a terminal, their expressions growing more concerned by the minute. I could hear snippets of their conversation. Can't ping the authentication module at all. The whole directory is empty. Not just the file, the whole thing is gone. There's no backup. There was never supposed to be a backup. Julian stood behind them, shifting his weight, his confident posture slowly starting to fray at the edges. Well, restore it from the offsite archive, he said, his voice a little too loud. Marco looked up at him, his face pale. Sir, there is no offsite archive for the key. That would be a major compliance violation. It's designed to exist in only one place. Julian's face tightened. That's a ridiculous design. It's the law, sir, Lena added quietly, not looking at him. The quiet in our section of the office was becoming noticeable. People were still typing, but their movements were slower, their attention divided. They could sense the shift in the air, the rising tide of panic. It was Alistair Croft who brought it to a head. He emerged from his office, David Chin trailing behind him, and walked directly to where the IT team was working. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at Julian. "Julian," he said, his voice calm but carrying an immense weight. "David tells me there was an authentication failure with the payroll batch. What's the status?" Julian forced a smile. "Alistair, we're on it. Seems to be a minor data corruption issue. The team is just running diagnostics." Alistair's gaze didn't waver. "Lena, Marco, what have you found?" Lena took a deep breath. "Mr. Croft, the integrity seed is gone. The file, the key, it's been deleted." And the audit log shows. She hesitated, glancing at Julian. "Shows what?" Croft pressed, his voice gentle but firm. I didn't turn my head, but I watched from the corner of my eye, my hands resting calmly on my desk. I felt strangely outside of it all, an observer watching a play I had written unfold exactly as scripted. Marco spoke up. "The log says the file was deleted yesterday morning. On a directive." The air crackled. Julian's face, which had been pale, was now flushed with a defensive red. "I ordered a cleanup of some legacy files, yes. It was clutter. Redundant." Ilara was supposed to be managing the migration. He was trying to deflect, to spread the responsibility. Alistair Croft finally turned his head and looked at me. His expression wasn't accusatory. It was questioning, searching. I met his gaze and held it, my own expression unreadable. I gave him nothing. No nod of confirmation, no shake of the head. This was Julian's story to tell. "Clutter," Croft said, turning back to Julian. His voice was dangerously soft now. "Julian, that clutter was the foundation stone of our entire payroll infrastructure. Without it, we cannot pay our employees. Not the ones in this office. Not the ones in the warehouses. Not the contractors overseas. No one. Do you understand the gravity of that?" Julian's bravado finally shattered. "Well, surely Ilara knows how to fix it. She built the thing. Tell them, Ilara." He turned to me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading command. The entire department was silent now. Every eye was on me. They were all looking for a reassuring nod, a calm word that this was all a fixable mistake. I took a slow breath, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat longer. I looked from Julian's panicked face to Alistair Croft's grim, steady gaze. "Julian gave a direct order," I said, my voice quiet but clear, carrying across the still room. "I followed it. It's all in the audit log." I had not raised my voice. I had not accused. I had simply stated the fact. And in the stunned silence that followed, I saw the truth of my father's words. The crooked board was now lying in the middle of the floor for everyone to see. No one could pretend it was straight any longer. The CEO of Riverbend Solutions was a woman named Evelyn Reed. She was a formidable presence, sharp and direct, with a reputation for not tolerating incompetence. When she walked into the department at 11 a.m., flanked by Alistair and the head of HR, Sarah Jenkins, the ambient noise of the office evaporated. They convened not in a conference room, but right there, in the open plan space, a silent declaration that this was no longer a private matter. Julian was summoned from his office, and he approached the group like a man walking to his own sentencing. "Alistair," Evelyn began, her voice low and controlled, "walk me through this." Simply. "The payroll system is locked," Alistair said, his tone grim. "The master encryption key was deleted yesterday morning. We have no backup, by design and by law. As of now, we have no mechanism to pay any of our 1,872 employees tomorrow." Evelyn's gaze, cold and hard as Riverstone, shifted to Julian. "Who deleted it?" "It was part of a necessary system modernization," Julian began, his voice thin and reedy. "Who," Evelyn interrupted, "gave the order?" There was a moment of suffocating silence. All eyes were on Julian. He looked from Evelyn to Alistair, then his gaze darted toward me, a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes. Sarah Jenkins, the HR director, stepped forward slightly, holding a tablet. The system audit log is unequivocal, Evelyn. It records the time, the terminal, and the authorization. It states the file was deleted per directive from Director Julian Vance. Evelyn stared at Julian, her expression unreadable. Is that true? It was a misunderstanding, he stammered. The file was it wasn't made clear to me what its function was. It was presented as legacy clutter. Alistair Croft let out a short, sharp sigh, a sound of profound disappointment. Julian, your job as Director of Internal Systems is to understand the function of our systems. It's the literal definition of your role. Ilara, your designer and administrator for 12 years, advised you against this, did she not? All heads turned to me. I had remained at my desk, a silent observer. Now I was being drawn into the center. I stood up slowly. Yes, Mr. Croft. I did, I said simply. Evelyn looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. There was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. And what was his response? He told me not to be dramatic, I replied, my voice even. He said it was housekeeping. The words landed in the silent room with devastating weight. Julian's face crumpled. The last of his defensive posture dissolved, leaving him looking small and shockingly vulnerable. He had been so focused on establishing his authority that he never bothered to acquire the knowledge that would have earned him genuine respect. I was trying to be proactive, he whispered, a last, desperate attempt to reframe his monumental error. You were reckless, Evelyn said, her voice cutting through his excuse. You flew a plane without checking if it had wings. You have exposed this company to massive financial liability, regulatory penalties, and a catastrophic loss of faith from our employees. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her words were a quiet indictment, delivered with surgical precision. She turned to Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, please escort Mr. Vance to your office. I believe his time at Riverbend Solutions has come to an end. 2 security guards, who had been standing discreetly by the elevators, moved forward. They didn't touch him, but their presence was an unmistakable finality. Julian looked around the room, at the faces of the people he was supposed to lead, and saw only averted eyes and stony silence. He had built no bridges, only walls. As they walked him away, his expensive shoes, which had always clicked with such arrogant confidence on the polished concrete floor, were silent. When he was gone, a collective breath seemed to be released. The tension didn't disappear, but it changed. The immediate crisis was over. The larger one remained. Evelyn Reed, Alistair Croft, and Sarah Jenkins turned to face me. The 3 most powerful people in the company were standing in front of my desk, their expressions a mixture of desperation and respect. It was Evelyn who spoke, her voice softer now, but no less direct. Ilara, you built the archive. Can you fix this? I looked at the 3 of them. I thought of the river, of the heron, of my father's workshop. I thought of the quiet dignity of good work and the importance of having it valued. This was no longer just about a file. It was about the foundation of my own future. Yes, I said, and my voice was steady, grounded, and clear. I can. I paused, letting the word hang in the air, letting them feel the full weight of their relief. But not today, I continued. And not under the old terms. We need to have a conversation about what my work is worth and what a healthy, respectful structure looks like moving forward. We need to build a new frame. Alistair Croft met my gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a nod of understanding, of respect from one craftsman to another. Evelyn Reed's expression didn't soften, but a new light entered her eyes. She saw not an employee, but a partner in the solution. All right, Ilara, she said. Let's talk. I looked past them, through the large window at the end of the office. The sun had broken through the clouds, and the leaves of the oak trees outside were bathed in a warm, golden light. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, deeper and more profound than any I had felt in months. I hadn't just deleted a file. I had cleared a space. A space for me to stand, to be heard, and to finally stop planing things straight. The work of rebuilding could begin. But this time, it would start with me.